Sorry.
You're almost live. You are live.
Thank you, Alex. At 5:03, I'm calling to order the August 15th meeting of the Finance Committee, and if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly. Councillor Cassett?
Here.
Councillor Lindell? Here. Councillor Rivera? Here. Councillor Villarreal?
Present.
And Councillor Romero-Worth.
I am here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. If we could get, do we have changes to the agenda? I believe we do, correct?
Yes, Madam Chair. Item C has been removed.
Okay, so we're removing item C. Are there other changes from staff?
No other changes, Madam Chair.
Okay, any changes from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve as amended.
A motion and a second to approve the August 15th agenda for the Finance Committee. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed or abstaining? No, that motion passes. Now we're on to approval of the minutes. Are there changes to the August 1st minutes of the Finance Committee from staff? Oh, sorry, we'll go back to consent.
No changes, Madam Chair.
Okay, any changes from the committee on minutes? Is there a motion on minutes, August 1st?
Second.
Motion is second to approve the August 1st minutes of the Finance Committee. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. All right, back to approval of the consent agenda. Are there items the committee would like to hear? Councillor Cassett.
H and I, please.
H and I. Other members? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Item D is in dog for a quick question. And did you say H and I?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Anybody else? Councillor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Item A and B.
A and B. Councillor Rivera? Nothing? All right. Can we get a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Presentations. We have, I think, although I don't see him. Oh, there you are. You're in the official chair. Sorry. Ricky Bejarano, our interim assistant finance director, with the FY21 audit update. Welcome, Mr. Bejarano.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. The audit contract for 21 and 22, 21 has been uploaded and approved by the Office of the State Auditor. We can move forward with that as soon as we bring it before a committee because it is over $200,000. FY22, we received permission from the state auditor to do the audits as simultaneously as possible. And so we'll be bringing both before the committee once they're approved by the state auditor. They'll come to finance and then I believe, I forget the second committee, but they'll be before both committees and then before governing body. The CLA contract, of course, was approved this afternoon, and so I'll be making contact with them and getting them to work as quickly as possible on the 22 accounting and auditing prep. With that, I stand for questions.
Questions from the committee? Thank you for the update. All right, we are on to the City of Santa Fe benefits FY 2020. Start again. On to the City of Santa Fe benefits FY22 end of year presentation. We have with us Todd Berkeley from Aon, Bernadette Salazar, our HR director, and anybody else? Just the two of you? All right, got a third name here. And with that, welcome, Mr. Berkeley. That button's a little stubborn. Yep, when the red light, when the red ring goes on around it, keep, push again. There you go, it's on now.
Oh, no?
Yep.
Oh,
And you kind of have to talk into it, sorry. Someday we'll get one that rises up and down with the height of the people speaking.
Okay, thank you. Just wanted to give a quick update on the status of the benefit program, mainly medical and dental, for the year ended 6/30 of 2022. If you have the exhibit in front of you, there was about $18.7 million in funding. That includes both the city's share and the employee contributions, $17.66 million in claims, fixed costs, so that's your stop-loss premiums, your administration was right at $2 million for total expenses of $19.664 million, or a shortage for the year of $933,000, a little bit better than I think I projected at the last meeting, which was about $1 to $1.2 million. But the other important line, the bottom line, 105% loss ratio. That means that expenses exceeded funding by 5%. Next, the page with all the little numbers is the same information, just on a monthly basis. We'll gloss through that quickly. The next page shows dental. Dental is sufficiently funded, so there was no need to change the funding of that for the upcoming fiscal year. And I want to point out on the final page that high-cost claimants, which are typically the driver of the City of Santa Fe's surplus or deficit at year-end, were this was a better than average year, about $2.1 million in claims over $125,000, $422,000 in stop-loss reimbursements. Those are reimbursements for any claimants who exceeded $250,000. If you look at the two prior years, it was either $1 or $2 million higher. So despite a relatively good claim year in terms of high-cost claimants, there was still a $1 million shortfall. With that, I am open to any questions.
Questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Sorry, I think I have a question for Ms. Salazar. The number of subscribers doesn't seem to reflect the number of vacancies that all our departments are claiming that they have. Do we know what that might be?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, are you referring to the first page?
I think it's on multiple pages, but it doesn't look like the subscribers are really going down much from, I mean, they have gone down some, but not compared to what we're hearing from staff about the number of vacancies throughout the city.
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, we can look at the vacant positions compared to the number of subscribers or employees who elect the coverage with the City of Santa Fe and provide those numbers to you.
Yeah, just curious, because I'm sure the numbers would all be different if we had a significant amount of vacancies, which I keep hearing we do, but the numbers that were being provided here today don't look like they're that significant.
So if we look at columns A, B, and C, row
Which page are you on?
on the first page, row 1, it is going down a little bit, but it's not going to be exactly apples to apples with the number of vacancies that we have, but we can look at that. If we trend it out years back, it's going to look significantly different.
Okay. If you can let me know, just more of a curiosity question than anything else. I think that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Other questions from the committee? Thank you for the update.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair.
Councilor Rivera.
Ms. Salazar, meeting with the benefit committee, is that continuing to happen, or is there scheduled meetings moving forward?
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, they are scheduled on a quarterly basis, compliant with the resolution that establishes the committee. And I did send out the schedules so that the councilors know when those meetings are taking place. But if you did not receive it, I can make sure to resend it.
I haven't checked, so if you send it, I'll take a look at it. But thank you very much. Appreciate that.
No problem.
One more question, Councilor Cassett.
I'll just comment on that, Councilor Rivera. It was sent at 5:01 p.m., so it's probably in your inbox.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Salazar.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on to our consent agenda. We'll start with item A, request for approval of a sole source general service contract with Parkinson Corporation to purchase and install the Aqua Guard screen filter and Aqua wash press for the Headworks facility for the wastewater treatment plant facility in the total amount of $274,699, excluding New Mexico gross receipts tax. And we have Mr. Herbrandt. Oh, no, we don't. We have somebody new. If you could introduce yourself, and sorry the mic is so low for people who are tall. Appreciate that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I apologize for, my name is Benjamin Sandoval. I am the plant maintenance superintendent at Wastewater. So I'm in the maintenance division there.
Great. Thank you for introducing yourself. And Councilor Lindell, you pulled this item.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. Just a quick question on this. Is this the only company that does provide this piece of apparatus?
Madam Chair, Councilor Liddell, yes, it is a sole source. That is the only company that we can buy this type of equipment from.
So I see that it's a sole source. I just wondered, we had no one else that we could go to see if they could do this for us?
So at the time when we were assessing to replace the AquaGuard, we did reach out to several of our different vendors. Most of them did come back and tell us that this company here is the only provider that we can get that piece of equipment from.
I'm just curious, how many people do you think that they will send over here to do this work, and how long will it take them?
So, Madam Chair, Councilor Dell, for this piece of equipment here, this is just for the equipment itself. This is not for anything as far as installation for the equipment. The equipment later on would have to be probably subcontracted because of the equipment. The company that supplies this equipment is not from way out of state, and they don't do anything as far as installation and demolition of the work.
Okay. It does say in our caption that it's purchase and install. So I suppose I could get to the contract on this. So is the caption incorrect?
Correct, yes. I apologize for that. That was something that was brought up later on. When the bid out for the piece of equipment, a lot of it was included in the packet as far as installation drawings for the piece of equipment. So it's not including the installation, but they are showing it that different types of specs and what it would take to install it. I apologize for that.
No, I understand, but we probably need to get that corrected, please. That's all I have.
Other questions from the committee? Is there a motion?
For approval.
We have a motion and a second to approve item 7A. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. Thank you.
All right, on to item B, request for approval of amendment number 3 to the lease agreement between Garson Studios Santa Fe LLC and the City of Santa Fe for the premises located at 1600 St. Michael's Drive, Santa Fe, New Mexico. Allows lease to request several or all holdover extensions, and We have Lee Logston, our Asset Development Manager, here to answer questions, and Counselor Lindell, you pulled this item as well.
Correct. Thank you. So, with this, it's 4 additional 6-month extensions at the city's sole discretion, and it also, why don't you tell us what the differences are in this and the previous amendment?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Councilor Lindell, members of the committee. The terms, in terms of there being 4 extensions, have not changed. The difference with this amendment is we are allowing Garson Studios to request all of them at once if desired. And the reason for that is that Claudio is in the process of initial talks and negotiations with several productions, and it was thought that it might be advantageous to be able to request all of them at once in order to secure a longer-term production and or multiple productions. As it is now, the extensions are co-determinant with whatever license agreement he has in place right now. So in other words, if the license he has going right now would end within that first 6-month holdover extension, he would need to come back and then he wanted to extend that either for them or another production, he'd need to come back and request the second one. And so what this allows him to do is to request all 4 at once in order to secure a larger, longer-term production.
Well, what if a year and a half from now, we would like to not be leasing that property? Are we're going to be obligated for 2 years?
We would be if, Counselor, we would be if Claudio and Garson Studios does in fact negotiate such a film license. Our legal team worked with Terry Lease and Asset Management and determined that a full extension, which would be through August 26th of next year, still fits in with our RFP schedule and so forth for Garson Studios. So it was determined that we could go ahead and allow that sort of thing, and it wouldn't tie our hands in a way that would complicate future development at Midtown or response to the Garson Studio RFP.
All right. I thought that we said that it was for 4 6-month extensions that could be requested all at once.
Yes, sorry, I
would
think I
take us
gave you the
past
wrong
next
year. I
year.
said 2023, I mean 2024.
Well, that seems very advantageous to the name of Claudio's company is Garson Garson Film, Garson Production.
Yes.
That seems advantageous to them, for sure. Did we put any kind of an increase on our rate on this lease?
Not on this one, no.
We don't think that the marketplace has changed so that we could have gotten a little more money out of this lease?
Counselor, that's a fair question that honestly I would have trouble answering. I was given this lease to get through the committee process, get through finance approval and the committee process after it had already been negotiated, so I was not privy to discussions in-house and with legal and so forth as to whether their lease rate ought to be raised.
Well, I appreciate that answer, Lee, that you weren't involved in this. On this lease, and I didn't read every page of it, do we have any, I'm sure we have a base rent. do we have, after a certain amount of rent, do we get any kind of a percentage rent on this lease?
No, not to my understanding of it. It's just a base rent, and then they also pay for improvements and so forth to the site that are needed for the various productions.
But if I remember correctly, they don't pay rent when they don't have it rented out. Is that correct?
That is not my understanding. They pay a base lease for the spaces that they're inhabiting. I'm on my own here and receiving texts from people who are trying to help me. That, honestly, Counselor, I don't have a solid answer for you on that. I can certainly, if this is something you want to table this over, we can certainly come back to Finance better prepared to answer that and any other questions that come up here.
I think that that's probably a good idea, so that we can have a little bit more detail on this, and also why we didn't have any increase in it. I don't know the marketplace for moving-making facilities, but I keep hearing that they're in great demand. I'm wondering if we could not have gotten a little bit more rent on this.
Counselor, if I may, I just got a text from Terry saying we've not amended the prices he pays in rent in accordance with the old appraisal we approved when we entered the original agreement.
Would you say that again, please?
Terry said that we have not amended the prices that Garson Studio pays in rent in accordance with the old appraisal we approved when we entered into the agreement with Garson in the first place.
Yeah, I don't remember when we did enter into that, the original lease. It's been a while. In fact, I think Mr. O'Reilly was here when that was entered into, so it's been quite a while. So I would wonder if we're getting our best return on that.
Counselor, I don't know that I've got an answer that would be satisfying to that, but I can say that film operations out there on the campus, while we've been successful in leasing out the space and securing film licenses out there, it is not without its own complications, having to do with insurance and fire suppression in particular. The film companies have to do their own fire watch and have their own suppression on hand in order to operate out there, and that is an expense they take on themselves and could conceivably make the property less attractive to another lessee that's not willing to go to that effort. Speaking off the cuff there, but that's one thing I know about it.
Okay. What other committees?
It's going to Public Works on 8/8, and, Quality of Life on 8/17, Governing Body on 8/31.
All right. Maybe we could have the answers to those questions. You could get those to us, and if need be, they can be discussed at the governing body.
Absolutely, Counselor. I appreciate the flexibility and that you're willing to let us do that. And I will get answers to those and come better prepared to talk about the particulars of the original agreement and the pricing and so forth over the years.
I would just talking about what our base rent is, and if we have any provision in there that changes when the property is not actually being subleased. Thank you, Chair.
You mentioned, Lee, a appraisal that was used in determining the amount of the lease payments or lease. How long are appraisals good for?
The one in question, per Terry on my phone here, was 2019. I think that's somewhat the discretion of the city and the entities involved in the agreement. For instance, on another lease amendment that I have on consent agenda, they used a 2017 appraisal. That's for Santa Fe Recovery Center, and it was decided that it was fair enough to just adjust that for inflation. So I can tell you that asset management has been comfortable in using appraisals that are several years old. If we all know that ultimately there's an RFP out for the studios and the film process at Midtown, and so there's a definite, call it end of life for the way we're operating right now in terms of film on the campus. And I would say, I'm guessing here that it was decided that an older appraisal was okay. It wasn't necessarily to order up a new one, given the fact that, this has a definite lifespan.
Right. Okay. Other questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Just some quick things, not questions, but the memo on the front page doesn't have Director Brown's signature in it, so I assume he's on board, but...
He is on, thank you, Counselor. He is on board. This was the first lease agreement I had taken through the new finance process, and so it was a learning process for me. I sent it out without his signature, thinking his was one of the last ones to go on it, and apparently it didn't. We will make sure that is properly handled next time. It's, another process I've needed to learn here is to get these agreements through the approval process. I do also, if I can right now, to Councilor Romero-Worth's question, I do have from Terry that appraisals are typically good for 1 year.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. Just on page 4, also Ms. Lotero's signature is missing from there, so again, just to make it cleaner, I think. 4 of our packet, so it's page 2 of the actual agreement, I guess. Yeah, page 2 of the lease agreement. I believe the last signatures are the clerk's and the mayor's ones, the governing body approves, is my understanding.
You are correct, Councilor Rivera. Thank you for pointing that out. This lease amendment was handed off to me. I needed to learn the process. I will take some fault definitely in this kind of going through somewhat at the last minute to try and keep it on committee schedule. I can tell you that finance did sign off on it. I could produce emails and so forth. I think we had a little snafu with the version of the packet that was sent back to us versus what was uploaded into PrimeGov. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly an error that I and we in our process need to tighten up on, but I can absolutely assure you that finance did approve it.
Okay. Thank you. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Linda. If you could, why don't you try to send out to us what are a little balance sheet of how this works, because the city is responsible for a lot of the costs that happen on that property. So let's take a look at what our rent is, as opposed to maybe for 1 year, maybe for last year, what we paid out in our obligations of expenses for the property.
When you say property, do you mean Garson Studio property?
Correct.
Only, just that?
Correct.
Okay.
Is that, whatever, well, let's put it this way. Whatever property this lease is pertaining to.
And Madam Chair, sorry.
Councilor Rivera.
One more comment. The appraisal being only good for 1 year doesn't sound right. I mean, I mean, we would have to go.
That's pretty expensive to go out for appraisals all the time.
So if you can confirm what the actual time frame for appraisals is, I think that would.
Sure, I'll do that. Absolutely. Thank you, Counselor.
Other questions from the committee? What's the pleasure of the committee?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
Mr. Loxton, is there any time constraints with this, or we need to get this done by the next council meeting?
It would be ideal to do it sooner rather than later, but certainly you guys have all raised valid questions. If you're more comfortable, having this delayed and come back to Finance Committee, we can do that. If these are answers that we can provide to the governing body or the subsequent committee meetings and keep things moving, that would be great. But I totally defer to what the committee feels on this.
Can you have these questions answered and the information provided by Wednesday, which is quality of life?
Yes. Yes, sir, I can. And I'll also say that the extensions, so if you look at the dates on the lease, the lease without the holdover extensions terminates actually on the 26th of this month. But the way the lease reads is that when Garson has a license that runs over, that first extension, then it just continues on. So we're not under the gun in terms of this thing's going to expire and we've got to do it ASAP. It would just be cleanest for us to do it ASAP and get it all squared away.
Personally, I think I trust that if you could have the information by Wednesday and Quality of Life Committee was okay with it, as the chair is on this committee as well, that if it needed to come back at that point, you can refer it back.
Yeah, I feel comfortable being able to do that, and we'll navigate that at Quality of Life.
Yeah, absolutely, Counselor and committee. I appreciate your flexibility on this. I will compile all the questions that have been raised tonight, and I will just make that part of my presentation at Quality of Life and make sure we address all those. And then I'll also have Mr. Lease here with me for backup.
Councilor Lindell.
I'm not on that committee, so would you be sure that we do send out that balance sheet?
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Madam Chair, is it appropriate to move forward without a recommendation?
Yeah, I think we can do that.
I'll make a motion that we move forward without a recommendation.
Is there a second? We have a motion and a second to move this item to forward, which would be to Quality of Life without recommendation. Is there a discussion on that motion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you all for bearing with me.
Madam Chair, who was the second on that?
Councilor Lindell.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I make a recommendation to make a slight change for our agenda right now?
Sure.
I'm still waiting for an amendment to come forward for item H. I'd like to propose that we move to item I next and then come back to item 8.
With D first.
Oh, good. Oh, wonderful.
well-
Never mind. I'll let you know if we get there.
Yeah, so we'll check in with you after item D. Okay, so moving on to item D, request for approval of amendment number 3 to item 19-503 between the City of Santa Fe and Granicus LLC, previously Host Compliance LLC, for short-term rental monitoring and compliance services. Jason Sena is here. He is our Code Compliance Supervisor, Inspections and Enforcement Division of Land Use Department, And welcome, Mr. Senna and Councilwoman Villarreal. You pulled this item.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you, Mr. Senna, in person.
Good to see you.
You're usually running around all over the city, so thanks for being here. I guess I just wanted to hear a little bit about how host compliance is what the original name was, now Granicus, is going for all of you, and how it's integrating into with staff, and if maybe you could actually, if you have any information about if we have additional staff now supporting short-term rentals, and then I'll ask.
We're just waiting for one position to be filled in code compliance, short-term rentals, and zoning. We should be fully staffed.
And how is it, I'm assuming it's working well because we're making an amendment to continue working with this organization or with this company. So if you could tell us about why the contract went up about 68,000 or so, and if they're doing anything different, or
it's pretty much the same system that we'd be using. I do not know why it went up. When we first started using host compliance, I think this was back in 2018. So I'm not too sure. It was approved, and I'm not too sure why the price it got higher. But it is a good system, I believe, or a tool that short-term rentals can use to utilize. It helps us send out notice of violation or reminders for renewals, that type of stuff. It helps us pinpoint. It scrapes the websites like Airbnb and Vrbo, and it gives us illegal short-term rentals. It'll pick them out and show us that which ones aren't permitted and not that type of information. So I think it's a good tool to utilize.
if you could just let me know if they were doing anything different or why it went up a little bit, or if there was some other component they added to it or whatever, or maybe just inflation, I don't know. It would just be good to know about that. And then, yeah, just I was curious how it was going, and if with this system you were noticing more people in compliance, or
We are noticing more people in compliance. You know, with the new ordinance that came into effect last year, I believe this is helping us out a lot. We are getting a few complaints from the public about the cap and all that type of stuff. But you know, we still have the people that are out of compliance that we are having. Hopefully, the public, they either call and let us know, or we look on host compliance, or we are in contact with Airbnb and try to figure all this out with the non-compliant people.
so it's a combination. It's the system, and then it's also based on complaint, or it's complaint driven.
And then us also doing research on Airbnb and host compliance.
Got it. Okay, great. That's all I have, Madam Chair.
You mentioned the cap. We haven't reached the cap, have we?
We are 30 away from the cap.
Okay.
So we have 30 permits left in residential areas.
And how many do you have in process?
Right now in process, I think we don't have anybody waiting in line right now.
Okay. Other questions from the committee? Pleasure of the committee.
Move to approve.
Motion is second to approve this item. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Motion passes. Thank you for being here tonight.
Madam Chair, councilors, thank you.
Okay, Councilor Cassett, are you good or not good?
Jesse, are we ready?
H. We can go to I.
Let's reorganize, and I make a motion to move to item I and then back to item H.
Is there a second? Motion is second to go to item I and come back to H. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? All right, we're on to I. So, consideration of resolution number 2022, sponsored by Councilor Romero-Worth, Councilor Cassett, a resolution adopting new procedural rules for City Council standing committees. Jesse Guillen, our Legislative and Policy Innovation Manager, is here. It's going to hamper your getting your amendment. But maybe we won't be too hard on him. Councilor Cassett, you pulled this item.
Yes, we have a couple amendments to move. We sure do. So I will go ahead with moving these amendments. The first one, it just lays out what is.
Can you, so everybody can follow along, in the packet, it's the first
Yes.
one?
Yeah, so it's just,
There's no real, unfortunately, there's no real way to tell them apart, so apologies.
it just says Romero, Worth, Cassett, amend.
I know, but there's two of those.
Yeah,
So
I
this
have the other
one,
ones
I
from
believe,
Romero.
if we're on the same one, number one is on page 4 of the proposed rules, section 3B1. That's the one we're on.
Yes.
Is everybody with us?
Wait, no, that's, it's on page 4. Oh, yeah, they both start that way, though, unfortunately. This one is the one that has less language, so it's going to be looking at, on page 4 of the proposed rules, section 3B1, strike subparagraphs A through J in their entirety and insert in lieu thereof. And it's going to show the list. It sounds like our amendments kind of nest upon each other. Jesse, am I correct there?
Okay, just to be clear, I'm sorry. So the list is
It says
how,
A, call to order, B, roll call, C, approval of agenda, D, approval of consent agenda.
okay, and then, yeah, that's the problem, is, Jesse, we need to think about how we denote these things. So it's basically, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 down in your packet is the First Amendment. And it, just to be clear, it has to do with how you organize an agenda. And, did you find it, Counselor? Okay, so Counselor Cassett, if you could just speak to what is being addressed here.
Yes, so this is just including all of the items that would be included on a committee agenda. I believe there were some items in the original document that left out some of the items that we typically have, and I apologize. Let me go ahead and pull that up, and I can tell you precisely what was added.
My internet is being very slow, sorry.
So it is on page 4.
Madam Chair, my page 4 of the red line version,
Yeah, the red line will be different because it's longer. So if you go to Exhibit A, it will be your
An exhibit,
third item on the list of packet materials.
exhibit A is 3 down. What page?
Page 4.
There we go, page 4, yes.
And I believe that we added a few items, and now I have to see what we had.
So we have A through J in the, here, do you want it?
Yeah.
A through J in the,
In the original, and now we have an A through L, call to order, roll call, approval. We added in approval, we added in presentations. Sorry, guys, I apologize. We added in presentations. Nope, that was-
presentations,
What did we
actually
add?
matters from the chair.
Matters from.
Matters from
Thank
the
you.
committee,
Maybe
matters
I
from
should
the
just-
staff.
Do you want to take over this? Or is this a tag team?
Is that it?
Matters from the staff, matters from the committee, matters from the chair. We also specified what would go onto the consent agenda. So we are going to move approval of the minutes onto the consent agenda similarly as we do to a governing body, so that we do not have to have a separate motion for that. And then also we specified that on the consent would be items about which the presiding officer does not anticipate discussion, so that there is the option for the chair to preemptively pull something onto discussion. Kind of anything that's wrote would go onto consent and then could be pulled off otherwise. So it does give that option. Just more of a heads up, so that if there are members of the public who are specifically interested and they know that it's going to be discussed, that there is that option for that to happen. It does not remove the ability to remove things from the consent as we do on a regular basis. Did I describe that accurately? Finally.
On the job. Councilwoman Villarreal.
Actually, just a clarification on that. So can you give us an example of F2? So that's action items, consent agenda. I understand the minutes because we do that now. So what kind of items do you think would potentially be on, the presiding officer could put on that list? Or
So F2 is your regular consent. So really what you're looking for is examples of G, action items, discussion agenda. So what are things that the presiding officer would put on there? So we actually had this at Quality of Life the other night, that St. Elizabeth was giving an update on Santa Fe Suites. And that was something that I preemptively pulled onto discussion as opposed to putting it onto consent.
Okay, I get that. I mean, I get what you did. That's under discussion agenda.
Yes.
But items under, you're saying the consent agenda are all the ones that were pulled?
It says items about which the presiding officer does not anticipate discussion. So that means that there very well may be discussion, but the presiding officer has not anticipated it. Essentially, it's what we typically do. We put everything on consent, and then there's still opportunities to pull. It's a little bit, I think it's what's confusing about it is that it's been stated in the negative as opposed to in the positive, whereas if it was in the positive, we might put, action items, discussion agenda, items which the presiding officer does anticipate discussion that would have otherwise gone on consent. So I'm not quite sure why that language was utilized, and maybe Jesse can speak more to that. Done uploading amendments.
When you describe it, I understand it. When I read it, I'm like, I don't understand it.
Yeah, no, it took me a minute the first time I saw it too.
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, I think it's worth looking at the other amendment from Councilor Cassett and Councilor Romero-Worth, which adds in language under the discussion agenda that states two of the determining factors would be items about which a presiding officer anticipates discussion, so sort of the opposite of consent, and then items for which at the time the agenda is published, a written amendment has been included in the packet that either has not been voted on during a previous council committee or has been voted against during all previous council committees. So between the two amendments, you have information on what's included on consent and what should be included on discussion.
Okay, well, I'll yield the floor now, so maybe talking about that other amendment might help.
So let's jump into that one. So as Jesse just described, it does then state it in the positive. The other item is, as you mentioned, if there's amendments that we know that have not been acted upon, so they have not yet attached, this is to give opportunity to make sure that those amendments can be considered if people would like to consider them. This really came from, there was a bill that recently moved through governing body, and so this is something that we'll have to look at with the governing body rules, that there was an amendment that had not been acted upon. We all forgot to pull it, and then we had to come back and redo it. So this is hoping to address this issue and to make sure that basically that when new amendments are added, that it's flagged, especially since we do have the new procedure rule of things attaching.
Just to be clear, so when Councilor Cassett says we had to come back, we passed the bill through the governing body and then realized this was the place for the alcohol license for Zozobra, and the amendment changing the location was not adopted because nobody pulled it. So we had to come back in a special governing body meeting. It was that important to get that right. And so this, I think, creates a safety net so that we don't have that situation.
And to be clear, and then the second part of that is that if an amendment is added to the packet for a legislative item after the publication of the agenda, so today's a great example, the council committee shall remove that item from the consent agenda and place it on discussion during approval of the agenda or approval of the consent agenda, Jesse? That would be approval of the consent agenda, correct? You have it under approval of the agenda. I just got that, sorry. And to be clear, it doesn't mean that we would have to act on the amendment, but we want to make sure that we do not miss them. So say it gets pulled onto discussion, the sponsor of the amendment does not sit on that committee. Nobody on the committee is so inclined to move said amendment. The amendment does not have to be considered or moved, but we do want to flag that it is there.
Again, just so we don't miss it. Councilwoman Villarreal, are you done for a moment? Do you want to think a bit? I can come back. Councilor Rivera is ready to take up the floor. Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. With regards to F2, so based on your example and based on amendment number 2, it sounds like items about which the presiding officer anticipates discussion, that should be then, I guess, flagged by the presiding officer and either moved to discussion on the agenda. But even the example you gave with St. Elizabeth, you anticipated there was going to be discussion. So if there's not going to be discussion, you'd want it on consent because you just want it to go through without anybody pulling it. So
Correct, yes. So F2 is, again, that one's stated in the negative, that if you do not anticipate discussion, it's going on to consent. With the other amendment, it pulls out the opposite, that items that the presiding officer does anticipate discussion, you put it on.
So what would be pulled from does not anticipate discussion? Is that something from the discussion agenda that the presiding officer would move to consent?
No, it's just trying to make that clarification of when we are prepping the agendas, what goes on to consent, what goes on to discussion. So that's, if we have our pile of items, the default tends to be consent. And so I think it does get a little bit confusing with the language because it is stated in that negative. And I guess the question now becomes, is it even necessary for us to have that piece of this amendment? If the second amendment goes through, we might actually be covered and still covering kind of the differentiation that we're trying to make.
Yeah, Amendment 2 makes more sense to me than this.
Yeah. So it might be that we want to amend the First Amendment to strike. Well, okay, I think this is a problem. I'm sorry. We had this conversation like a month ago, so it's re-triggering now. I think what we were trying to do is list the items that would go on to consent. And the purpose of doing that was to list the fact that approval of the minutes is now going on to consent. So then we had to list what else is going on to consent because we don't want it to look like in the rules that the only thing that goes on to consent is just approval of the minutes. So we did have to put on this item, this other component of certain items, and it is items about which the presiding officer does not anticipate discussion. So I apologize. That was why.
And that's why it's stated in the negative. I'm glad you remembered that.
Me too. It took a while to get there.
Because if you, obviously you don't put on consent something that you know is going to have discussion, right? So it's sort of, it feels like it doesn't need to be there, but for the fact that you don't want an interpretation where the only thing that goes on consent is approval of the minutes.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I apologize. It took me a while to recall the very long ago conversation that we had about this one. Any other questions? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all I have, ma'am.
Okay. Back to you, Councilwoman Villarreal. Was there?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was still thinking of an example you all would put on the on this section.
So
maybe something happened recently. What would you put under action items consent agenda?
Besides
the minutes.
Basically everything. Like if you look at our current agenda, all of these items were items that that didn't anticipate discussion, so that I can't speak for you, but, but I'll take a look at quality of life, that as I'm looking at that, there was nothing that necessarily popped up and I said, we're definitely going to be discussing this, I'm preemptively pulling it.
It would be like the plaza bill we're going to do next, right? Under this, you would absolutely put it under discussion, because you know there's going to be discussion.
And then this one too, procedure.
And then this one too, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Pleasure, let's see, where are we? On amendment number 1, we need a motion.
So I would like to move to approve the first Romero-Worth Cassett amendment.
Which is basically just the list, adding matters from staff, matters from the committee, matters from the chair, and the conversation we just had on F, action items for consent agenda. Just so we're all clear.
Madam Chair, do we need a motion even to consider any of the amendments?
Well, that's what we're doing.
Is this just a
No,
regular motion?
this is just a regular motion. I'm just, because there's no way to differentiate the difference between the two amendments other than by their substance, I was just trying to explain the substance.
Madam Chair, councilors, if you look at the very bottom, there's a legislative number and then
look at that.
letter in parentheses.
Thank you. All right, so this is, the first one is 10407.1 parentheses A. It's at the bottom. I forgot about that, Jesse. Thank you. So, and I assume that the letter A attached to the end of that number denotes that there'll be a B, which is next. And they go together, like A and B.
I put a motion down.
So you make a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
A motion and a second to adopt amendment 10407.1A. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? That motion passes.
Okay, then I'd also like to make a motion to adopt amendment 10407.1 parentheses B.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve amendment 10407.1B. All those in favor, aye.
Oh, sorry. Well,
Sorry.
Quick question. Did we clarify the approval of agenda?
I'm not sure. What is the question?
Oh, you had asked about it.
Yes,
Approval of consent agenda.
Thank you. Should that be approval of agenda or approval of consent agenda?
Madam Chair, councilors, it should be approval of agenda because it's sort of it's an automatic withdrawal. Okay. Moving to discussion.
Okay, thank you.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. On to the bill as amended. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. There we go. Further discussion or motions?
So hold on a minute. Sorry, there's 2 more amendments.
Right, so.
All right, yeah, so, but I just want to, okay, so let's go with the first one that I have that's.
Can you, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 down, and then item number on it is 10407.1C. Correct?
Yeah, I'm going to.
That's the one you want to talk about, right?
Correct. So I just want to make sure nothing has changed since I had proposed this. I was just trying to think of if someone's not on a committee and they want to, they're not on a committee, but they're the sponsor of that legislation, that they would be able to speak first for an item after a committee member makes a motion that's seconded. So it was clarifying what was stated before, which is on page 5, right? That the presiding officer generally recognizes committee members in the order in which they request the floor. The item on the agenda is if the item on the agenda is legislation, the presiding officer shall allow the sponsor of the legislation to the opportunity to make a motion and speak first on the item. I was just trying to make sure that if someone's not on that committee, they still have an opportunity to speak about their item. But I want to make sure nothing's changed since the last,
The way that I'm,
go ahead.
Counselor Cassidy.
the way that I'm reading this, I don't see this as, that there's a specification that the sponsor has to or has to not be on the committee, that I read this that the presiding officer shall allow the sponsor an opportunity, to make a motion and speak first. I see, because they can only make a motion if they are on there. There you go. Uh-huh.
So this may be a longer way to say it, but it was really making sure that if the sponsor of the legislation has an opportunity to speak about it, and they don't, if they're not on it, they're not going to be making a motion, obviously. So
That makes sense.
hopefully it captures that. We did this a while ago. I feel like too.
I think that has been our practice, and I think that's like professional courtesy, but if you want it in black and white, I don't see a problem with it. Counselor Cassidy.
I think the only piece that I don't think your amendment gets to it, because we don't have the requirement of a motion and a second on the floor to start discussion during the committee process. So there could be a whole host of discussion that's happening, and then a motion is on the floor, and then the sponsor would get the opportunity. So the way that the amendment is written doesn't quite capture, I think, what you're trying to do. Yeah.
Which is to speak first.
Right.
Right.
Before any discussion.
Correct. So, maybe Jesse has a solution.
Jesse.
Madam Chair, Councilors, I did speak with Aaron about this, and I know we had this discussion about having a motion on the floor, and it is in Robert's rules to have a motion on the floor first before there's discussion. So I think this works because standard procedure would be to have a motion on the floor before even the sponsor, if they're not a member, talks about it.
So we probably need to do things differently at the committee level than we have in the past.
So if the desire of the committee is, or of an individual member, is to have discussion before there's a motion on the floor, then we'll have to add that to these rules, because otherwise Robert's rules takes precedence, which is to have a motion on the floor first.
I think we did have a discussion about this, or maybe you and I just had a discussion. Sometimes I get confused where the discussions happen about, and you and I had a discussion about this, Councilwoman Villarreal and I, for those who are listening and can't see where I'm pointing on the screen, that one of the challenges of doing it at committee is that kind of this idea that, of how do we make the committees a little bit more discussion-based, and that there are these times where after discussion we decide to postpone legislation either indefinitely or until a date certain, and so allowing for that flexibility. And that it has been the common practice at the committee level to not have the motion and the second on the floor, because we are kind of still mulling things through. So rather than do things differently, I'd rather change the amendment.
Well, but here's another thought, though. So just because there's a motion on the floor, and we were talking about this just before the meeting. So I hear you. So the idea is maybe at the beginning of this is the first time we've heard the bill, maybe we have a kind of an idea which direction we're going to go, but based on the conversation, we as a group sometimes kind of coalesce around a particular direction we're going to go, either to approve it or postpone it or deny it, and that we might not know that right out of the gate. But that's even still okay, because even if there had been a motion, say, to approve, we would either withdraw that motion or we would vote it down and then have a new motion. And so you don't necessarily, I think, have to change this, do you?
And can't we also layer motion, so we can motion to approve, and then we can layer a motion to postpone, which is what happened with the veterans banners today, that there was already a motion on the floor, and we just picked up at the fact that the motion was on the floor already.
But I think only in that instance. Like if it was a motion to deny, you wouldn't, I don't think you could move to approve until you dealt with that motion. I don't know why it's any different than what we do at governing body. We just need to change the way we practice things. Councilwoman Villarreal?
In this discussion, it makes me think we should actually
Put something in the rules.
put something different in what it states now, so that we don't necessarily have to put a motion in second when we're looking at legislation in committee. It could be an option. I guess just after this conversation, I know it says in Robert's rules, but the way it seems to flow better is that you get to actually talk about legislation so that people can then decide what steps, we may not all be in agreement, but what steps would be taken next, instead of setting a precedent at the beginning where you're making a motion and no one has even heard about the bill yet, or the legislation.
Jesse, remind me the layering of the rules. It's Robert's rules, then, no, it's our rules. Remind me the hierarchy. Do you remember? Haha, putting you on the
Robert's
spot.
rules, our rules, there are a few others. I mean, if you go further up, you have like federal laws and state laws.
Right.
Then you get down to custom, which is sort of what we have
do.
generally done. But if you put something in our rules that supersedes that, then that is going to take precedence over what our custom is.
But and it also takes precedence over Robert's rules? Trying to remember that.
Customs would, I believe.
Customs, I would think, would be,
I'd have to go back and look at our rules.
yeah, I don't know. There is a hierarchy which would be helpful to understand in this conversation, so.
Madam Chair, I'd like to remove this amendment until I can figure out what's the best way to address the actual issue, which is not so much allowing for someone to speak about their legislation, we do that all the time, but when it makes sense to make a motion in second on an item we haven't heard. And if we really need to do that, because right now it says that in Robert's rules, but if this takes precedent, if we can change it in our committee rulings, I think it makes more sense. So I'd like to remove it.
Okay, so basically, you haven't made a motion to adopt this, so we'll just ignore it for now, but you do have another one, correct?
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was basic, well, we've been talking about this, and I think it came up even more strongly for me when we had a situation where I was waiting to hear back from staff. And what this amendment does, if I can find it, it essentially allows us sorry?
Is it in the?
It's in the packet, if you refresh it.
It's 8 down the list.
And it, instead of requiring us to notify the staff liaison and chair no later than 4 hours prior to the commencement of the committee, council committee meeting to pull an item or remove an item from consent, it changed it to 2. And the reason why I was trying to figure out a middle ground is because, well, for 2 reasons. One is because we don't always hear back from staff immediately when we're needing some clarification on an item, and that would be, at least for me, there's times that I don't hear back, and so 4 hours doesn't give us that leeway to hear back from staff who's busy. The other thing is some of us that work another job don't have the morning to figure out and get those questions answered on Monday morning meetings. And so I was trying to find a balance between 4 hours, which would mean that we'd have to let you all know by 1, versus being able to let you know by at least 3 if we're going to pull an item from consent. So I guess I was wanting to hear from staff. Although you all are, there's certain folks that are responsive. Sometimes we don't hear from staff right away because you're busy and it's on a Monday. And I'm just giving a Monday example. It's happened in other committee meetings, but so I guess I just want to see if we can consider 2 hours. I know we do 4 for governing body, but in that case, I feel like we've already heard a lot of items anyway, and 4 hours is a sufficient amount of time to be able to let folks know what we're going to pull from consent. So I'll stop there and see if anyone has questions about that.
We split the baby and make it 3? I guess my question is I don't know who speaks for staff, but I feel for you because it's hard to plan your evening if you don't know whether you're going to be spending the evening with us. Sorry, Melissa, you must be like, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I hear what you're saying, but also you do have introduction of the bill, you do have the public hearing on the bill, obviously, there's a lot that comes at us, and it's hard to, we don't always deal with something until we have to deal with it, because there's so much to deal with. So I do understand that point, but I also kind of feel for staff and being able to plan an evening, whether it's with us or not with us. So I don't know, I'm a little conflicted. Thoughts on this? Councilor Lindell?
I'm inclined to agree with that. I know that sometimes we don't hear from staff, but I also know that a lot of times, if you send a email to staff, whether it's Friday, Saturday, or Sunday, you hear back from them right away, even on the weekends. I think that it's typical that you hear back from them in a timely manner. And if you don't hear back from them, then I guess it gets pulled and they'll be there to answer. But I would rather err on the side of letting people plan to get home for dinner or knowing that they could. That's just my thought on it. I think typically they're pretty good about getting back to us. That's all.
Other thoughts? Councilwoman
Madam Chair, I would never expect staff to respond to my email on the weekends if I have questions. Just saying, so I probably wouldn't ask the question about that. Like if I had a question about the agenda and then we get the actual packet material at the end of the day on Friday, which is 5 p.m. So I guess I'm trying to have some balance, especially those that work another job. Or then I'll end up pulling all of the ones that I possibly have questions on and then resolve it during that afternoon and see if it sticks.
Speaking as someone who has another job, is 3 hours doable? I don't know. Councilor Rivera, were you?
I'm just thinking about, we have weekends as well, so sometimes we're gone on the weekend, the packet's loaded Friday night. We don't look at the packet, sometimes I don't look at it until Monday morning after I take grandkids to school, so typically it's enough time to get it done by 2, 3 o'clock. I'm just thinking if there's any lengthy packets that come out on Mondays that may take a little bit longer to review. And then it says we have to let the individuals know that we have questions. Whoever is on the...
I think there's two.
Staff liaison and chair.
Yeah. Which you can do that in one shot with an email. There are, even if a packet comes out on Friday for a Monday meeting, it doesn't necessarily, most of this, well, not most, a lot of things that we get have already made other stops for finance, so, but not maybe for public works, public utilities, you might be.
We have had some lengthy meetings before.
We also have the opportunity, if it's an ordinance, for the public hearing after it's introduced.
Again, I don't have a job like many of you do, so, on Monday mornings, if you've had a weekend where you're out camping or doing something with no access to the internet, are you going to have enough time on a Monday with your other job to get it done by 2 o'clock?
Mondays are definitely.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also about not all legislation. We're talking about any item, contracts, things that we have questions on. Yeah.
Okay,
What? The compromise of 3 hours work for everyone. 2 o'clock.
I'm okay with 3. I just think we need some, I mean, we want to make sure staff knows. Obviously, we want to give you guys a heads up so that you don't have to be, you know.
so, okay, so let's not belabor this. Do you want to pull it and bring it back with 3? Do you want to just say 3 now, verbally?
I think I'd rather just say 3 now.
Okay, so you're going to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to amend my amendment. That's amend my amendment. Can I withdraw my amendment and then state a new amendment?
I think our rules,
Yeah.
how about if you just add it to the other one and bring them both forward?
The other one that
The first
needs
one
to
that you're
be,
with, yeah.
yeah, we could do that.
Counselor Lindell?
Were you done? Okay. I think this is a pretty complicated resolution. There's a lot of amendments here. And I think we've got to find a better way for us to try to go through this. I mean, whether each one gets its own red line or however we do that, this does not work for me. This is impossible to go through and keep track of one amendment as opposed to another amendment, as opposed to another amendment.
Yeah,
We're going to have another item tonight that's just like this. And, you know, I can't, I don't feel like I'm doing my best work when we have a list of things that they're deserving of us having a good, clear look at them. Councilor Villarreal's proposed amendments, to take a look at those, say, on page 5, line 16, after closures, insert. I mean, this is not, this format doesn't work for me.
This has been particularly hard because we're having to bounce back and forth between the bill and the amendment, and it's very difficult. So, you know, we have done this before, and I think we can do it again, where we get a red line that's color-coded by sponsors, yeah, with all of them, and I'm sure it was a time thing why this didn't happen. So I think in the future, Councilor Lindell, we can work on that.
I mean,
yeah, it's.
Maybe you guys track it better than I do.
No, it's been hard because you can't. I'm getting used to working with 2 screens, and when we come here, we only have 1, right? So I can't have the bill up on, and when we're on Zoom, I have the bill up on one, and then I got the amendment on the other, and you can go like this. But when we're here and we've got 1 screen, it's very difficult. Totally agree. So, yeah. So anyway, point well taken. All right, what do you want to do here? Let's not belabor this. Councilwoman Villarreal, what do you want to do?
I'll wait on my amendments, and then I would request that all of these amendments, even the ones we voted on tonight, will be part of the redlined, which is in our packet, but it's not updated.
Yep.
So we could just update that for the next meeting, which is governing body.
Okay, so we have a motion already.
No, we don't. Can I move to approve?
Yes.
I move to approve.
As amended.
As amended.
Is there a second? Is there a second?
Second.
Motion and a second to approve this item as amended. All those in favor, aye? Aye. Anybody opposed? Okay.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
One further recommendation. I was looking at the red line version, and that has a lot of information in it that is being deleted, so I'm not sure that helps. So a red line version of Exhibit A would be more helpful than looking at the red line version that's in there now.
Okay, and Jesse's here, he'll take note of that. Okay, we're going to move on to our last item, item H, right? I didn't have you for anything. I had A and B. All right, we're going to go back to, let's see, what did we just do? We did H. We did I, we're going to H, thank you. Consideration of a bill, number 2022-17, Councilwoman Villarreal and Councilor Rivera, an ordinance amending SFCC 1987, Section 23-5.1 to add definitions for cultural event and small commercial event, and amending SFCC 1987, Section 23-5.2 to allow up to 8 commercial permits for cultural events in the plaza, including Juneteenth, Pride, Indigenous Peoples Day, and 5 additional events selected by lottery. And we have Melissa McDonald, Parks Division Director, and we have Jesse here on this item. And Councilwoman Cassett, you pulled this item.
Okay, thank you so much. Here we go. I'm going to try to do my best. So, I have an amendment that I am proposing, and I am essentially just going to talk through what this amendment does, and then Jesse can talk through all of the technicalities. What this amendment would do is it would establish as small commercial events Juneteenth, Pride, and Indigenous Peoples Day. It would remove the lottery, so there would only be 3 small commercial events. Instead of the lottery, any other cultural event, so not just any event on the plaza, but any event that meets the definition of a cultural event, would be allowed to have one 100-square-foot commercial area where they could sell things. So essentially a 10 by 10 area where they would be able to sell merchandise. And that is the gist of what this amendment does. And 3 small commercial, no lottery, and the ability for every other cultural event to have one 100-square-foot area to sell items.
Okay, and the red line version that you just sent, Jesse, includes this amendment?
Madam Chair, Councilors, it does, and it is still confusing even though it's a red line, so I can explain if there are questions.
Okay, so I just wanted to draw the committee's attention to the fact that in your email is a brand-new red line. Also, Councilor Cassett, can you tell me, there's a bunch of amendments here, what's the number? I just want to make sure I'm following along, which is one, well, why don't you just tell me?
It will be 10401.2 parentheses D. And if you are counting down the row, it is the only CASA amendment in there. So 1, 2, 3, 4.
And if you're not seeing it, you need to refresh because it just came through.
Yeah.
Okay, so I just want to make sure that everybody's got the amendment and/or the red line that's in front of us. And I think we can at least have discussion on the amendment. So you're moving that?
Yes, I would like to.
Okay,
move that.
is there a second? Okay. One that says Cassett. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
All right, so for the purpose, okay, so we have a motion and a second to discuss this amendment. Are there, Councilor Rivera?
You said 10 by 10, and that makes sense, but this says 100 uninterrupted square feet.
Yes.
Could that be interpreted different ways? I mean, if you had 2-foot tables going 50 feet, is there different ways to interpret the 100?
Yes, it's 100 square feet, and however that is configured. We could have the discussion of making it very strictly a 10 by 10 space. But I did want it to allow some flexibility, as there's other booths that are, like, all these events can still have numerous commercial tables, or not, I'm sorry, non-commercial tables, informational tables set up. So they still may be filling the plaza with tables. And so they may snake in a different way.
Councilor Lindell.
Could I comment, Councilor Rivera? In looking at this, at the red line that Jesse sent us, this is the last page, the pink. And you probably did see this, but I'm just going to point it out that in this amendment, it does say, it doesn't specify the configuration, but it does say one display to equal 100 square feet. So however they get there in the configuration of the table, it is one, not 10 different tables with 10 square feet. It's one configuration, one display, one configuration. I just was trying to clarify that.
As long as they're contiguous. So it's like there might be, yes, they're uninterrupted. Thank you.
Sorry. Other comments, thoughts? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, yeah, I think that the lottery was really trying to allow for participation of groups that aren't as, they don't necessarily aren't large organizations or nonprofits, and they may not be as organized in terms of coming to council meetings to say, I want to come and be on the list to be a small commercial event permit. So that was my thinking about lottery, and I really felt like staff could figure it out and have an opportunity to be able to allow for people to put their event in the hat, so to speak, to be able to have their event and have vendors at their event. So the thing I do like about this is it does give some flexibility with some smaller groups that I think we're going to miss some in the process, but maybe later on we can refine that. So I think I'm leaning towards the fact that this is a good compromise, since we've been going back and forth about lottery and what that looks like. And I want to make sure that staff understands this, since we do have Melissa here with this amendment, to see if you have any questions about what that would look like, because essentially it's saying 3 that we've named, the 3 events, cultural events that we named, and then allowing for 1 point of sale. I keep wanting, no, don't use that term. Okay. Having a spot, one space to allow for commercial activity. And the configuration could be whatever it is needed in that space, with table setups, whatever, but it does fulfill that space limitation, which is the 100, sorry, say that again, 100?
100 square feet.
Okay. So I guess I just would love to hear from Melissa McDonald to see if there's anything that you have questions on, because this is this just came today. We hadn't seen it, so.
Madam Chair, councilors, I think I understand what the direction of this amendment is. It's really the pleasure of the committee, what they want. I think we can accommodate this and make it work.
And then the other question I have is, there's some things that have already passed with my amendment that has been carried in 2 committees, that have passed in 2 committees already, and there's pieces of it that still, there's 2 particular pieces I think are important to try to make sure that gets carried along, and I can state them, but I don't know if, Jesse, do we need to explain how that works? when you amend something that's already been through the process, and then there's similarities of what Councilwoman Cassett is proposing that are actually some of the amendments that I had already put in. So how do we approach this the best way that's a clean way so people understand?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman Villarreal, this is what took so long to get this amendment up, is that Aaron and I were going back and forth on the language. So if you look at Councilor Cassett's amendment, it does, I believe, the first number on the amendment sheet and the third have the language that mentions rescind amendment number 2 from amendment sheet B, and returning the language on page 1, line 15 to 6 instead of 5. So it's essentially that's striking the amendments that were approved at Quality of Life on the last meeting, whichever that one was. If that makes sense. So
it's striking
it's striking those 2 amendments. Okay. The rest of your amendments, which were approved, remain as part of the bill.
And does that show up somewhere? I mean, I know your red line shows that, but I want to make sure that in my amendment, is that amendment? No. This is that we have pride in there, and then the other language was that I want to make sure we don't miss is that the vendors, the plaza vendors shall not be charged additional fees to sell during these events. So those 2 remain, even though we don't see it as an amendment written that way?
Madam Chair, Councilwoman, that is correct.
Okay.
So basically, you have to take them together. The amendment number 2, right, and then this one, and the bill.
Yeah, the only parts of your amendment that are struck by my amendment are the parts that make reference to the lottery. Everything else stays the same. So pride, as well as the other piece about not being charged extra, so remains intact.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you. So I just want to confirm it. It's taking the language back to 6 instead of 5. So you limiting the number of events that can be on the plaza to 6 events?
Councilor Cassett.
Jesse, can you? No. So it should,
striking those.
It strikes that, but you have to kind of double strike it. So we have to strike her amendment that took it from 6 to 5, and then further down we just strike any reference to those that would have been lotteried to begin with. So there will be 3 established small commercial events, and then.
Okay, just wanted to confirm.
Correct, Jesse. Absolutely.
Sorry, I missed part of that, Madam Chair and Councilors, but essentially what we're doing is we're putting the language about the lotteries back to the way it is in the original bill, but then her amendment strikes it altogether.
Melissa?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Councilors. So I do have a follow-up question on this. So we're not limiting the amount of cultural events. Any cultural event at any time can have a table, 100 by 100. This is a bit concerning to me in that depending on the preparation, that means that we may have to have staff go out and at every commercial event validate that the setup is correct. So I just want to put that out there. It could end up costing us more effort because of the fact that even though it's small, if it's at every commercial event, then, you know, depending on the setup and the requirements, then we may have to have verification that they're meeting the rules and regulations. It could be not I have some concerns about it. Apologize.
Could you say the last part of that again? I'm sorry.
So whenever you have a commercial table, they have to be evaluated to make sure that they're staying within the bounds of the ordinance. And that generally requires staff to go out and make sure that they're not doing things that are going against the ordinance and code. And so if everything is perfect and maybe we have it really scripted very carefully in the guidelines, and I'm not saying it could be a problem, but I could foresee several, if we had a lot of cultural events that wanted selling things, and then we had to check to make sure that they were meeting the code, because it's a little different than just inspecting it from a cultural perspective. So it's just, I'm not sure I have to think about it, actually. I would like to understand it a little better, because, for example, if you're selling food, you have to meet certain requirements, and somebody has to check on those requirements, which is why when we have the events with the correct numbers, we have to account for that, right? Barbara often will go out and evaluate whether or not they're meeting the requirements. So it does potentially, depending on what they're selling, increase the number of commercial events more than what we originally were talking about. Does that make sense, or?
Yeah, thanks. Counselor Cassett.
Kind of. So if we have an event that is not commercialized, but they are, they still have a number of tables and booths and setups, or they're serving food, which sometimes happens. I guess I'm trying to understand the difference between one commercialized booth versus the option for there already to be tables and information, and I know booth is not the correct word, so I will stop using that. Information tables as opposed to a commercial table. Can you explain that a little bit more for me?
Yes, Madam Chair, Counselor. In particular, food is a very good example because they have different requirements for things like food versus tabling. You have to have, making sure if they're preparing the food, that everything's meeting the right amount, that you're meeting the codes, that you're not bringing in things. I mean, it's a different level of oversight sometimes. And so I'm not saying that it's necessarily a problem. I'm just saying that it could create a situation that if we had enough of these, it could be.
Okay.
It kind of depends on what they're selling.
So,
and that's what it's been all along, really. So what are they selling? How big is it? What time? I mean, there's factors that we don't know when we're talking about what is the commercial activity.
I see.
And I'm not saying that it's a huge problem. Maybe we can handle it in the guidelines, but I just want to think about that a little bit, because I do think if we had all the commercial events, all the cultural events on the plaza, and every single one of them did food, we would have to understand what's the programmatic element of that, and can we streamline that into the guidance.
So it sounds like that maybe the best course of action here would be to not move this amendment at this time. This is not something that sounds like it can be adequately, thoroughly thought through within the course of this meeting. So I will withdraw my my motion to approve the amendment at this time. And I suppose I leave it up to the rest of the committee as to whether we want to bring this back to finance in a couple weeks after there has been some more time to really think about this and kind of some of these other aspects or discuss it at governing body.
So you've withdrawn your motion. Does the second withdraw?
No. Who has the second?
I'm the second.
Who's the second? Okay. Are you going to withdraw your second? Well, then the motion's still on the
So
floor.
then let's discuss.
Wait, just hold on.
So Councilor Cassett, are you proposing to withdraw this because you want to do more work on it in consideration of what Ms. McDonald said?
Correct. That would be my intention, would be to spend the next couple weeks working with Director McDonald to look at if there are some other provisions that we would need to put in, such as maybe no food, to really understand the impact of what this amendment would do to this bill.
So would it come back to finance?
So that would be the next thing we'd need to decide, is whether to postpone to our next meeting But we could also, I guess, if you don't withdraw your second, you could also, we have a, let's see, let's think this through. We have a motion for an amendment, and then the question is, can we from there move to postpone to a date certain? I don't know the answer to that question. Melissa, you had your hand up.
Madam Chair, Councilors, one idea that Jesse and I were thinking about is maybe we could exclude like foods or something like that to make the amendment move forward.
Okay, Councilwoman Villarreal.
Just to clarify, in the conversations we've had about this, since it's really just small commercial event permits, it's tabling, it's a table, there's not much you can do in terms of trying to do something on the Plaza Park that creates a whole no food possibility. What Barbara and I had talked about is that this actually only applies to prepared food that you're actually selling at a table. You can't have a grill, you can't have propane anyway, so all of those things are not even allowed now. So I guess I think it's kind of a moot point about the food, because from my understanding is someone could sell at a table some food, but it would have to be prepared food that's like, you know, actually packaged, versus like selling merchandise. I think that was really.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Councilor Rivera.
Ms. McDonald, doesn't Barbara go out and look at all the events anyway? Because I heard of an event that happened recently where they were trying to sell T-shirts and CDs, and she told them that wasn't allowed. So I think she's out there for all the events to make sure that they're following the rules. This would just be an additional 100 uninterrupted square foot area that she would have to make sure that they were just confined to selling product from that one area. So it wouldn't be that much additional work to what she's doing now.
Madam Chair, Councilors, she does go out to quite a few events. She does not go out to all of the events. Although I think Councilor Villarreal's bringing up the prepared food does answer a lot of questions for me, because I think that is probably very true. If it's prepared food, it's probably good.
Okay, where are we? Well, actually, we were at Councilor Cassett.
Trying to decide if I'm withdrawing my second.
Okay, so you're not withdrawing your motion. We still have a motion and a second. That's where I'm going to say we are. Other discussion, Councilwoman Villarreal.
I think that instead of your idea about let's keep pushing it down the road, go to finance, the next finance, we have a significant amount of time between now and the governing body meeting, and some of these unknowns could be figured out. I mean, they're not really unknowns. It's really, I understand where you're trying to go with this, actually. And although I would like to keep lotteries in there, I know that there's been, you know, questions about how that would work. And so, I mean, I think that what you're trying to do covers, it does allow for a different kind of possibility, for sure. But it still keeps the named ones, which I think was important, because those are, those have a track record. The only thing I want to say is that when you remove the language with lottery, what goes with it is the track record of making sure those cultural events would even be considered. And I guess we're just kind of opening it up to anybody, really. They don't have to have a track record anymore. So the 2 out of the last 5 years will be removed with this amendment. And that was something that I think people, at least stakeholders, liked, because they knew that, oh, this cultural event, they've been permitted before. So I don't know how to resolve that right now. I'm just thinking out loud, because this, I think, is an option that will cover some groups that we I think will be missed possibly, and even on the lottery potentially, but maybe say more a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I've kind of gone back and forth on that. If we want to put in this kind of, this litmus test of, have you operated at least twice in the last 5 years in order to get this one commercial space? Because it was only one commercial space, I didn't feel quite as inclined to have to put in that litmus test. That was my thought, and so did think about that and was aware of that being shown.
Thank you. Thank you. That actually clarified in my mind, because when we're talking about lottery, that's really allowing for a number of vendors potentially, which I don't think is a bad thing. I'm still in favor of that. However, in this case, it's only one table, essentially, or one space. So, yeah, I think that tracker, I'm thinking out loud, I'm sorry, but this 2 to 5, I was trying to figure out what that would look like. So, okay, so I'll yield the floor for now. I just don't think that we need to bring this back to finance. I think we can work out some other possibilities.
Okay, well, we have a motion and a second on the floor. Further discussion? Councilor Rivera.
Yeah, I'm actually in favor of this moving forward. I think it makes good sense. It's, I believe, a good compromise to what's there, and I think it gives people that are out there waiting for this to happen an idea of how we're moving forward, and not the lottery, sort of what's going to happen with that, and do I need to apply as soon as this is passed? So I think it gives a little bit of clarification to people out there that are considering this. I think it's a good language, good compromise.
Other discussion? All right, we have a motion and a second to adopt this amendment. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Jesse.
may make one comment also for public notice. Because the amendment that was adopted changes the title of the caption, we are going to have to renotice the hearing. So I believe it's, instead of the 31st, it's now going to go to that first meeting in September as a public hearing.
For final passage?
Right.
Yeah, okay. I love that problem. We seem to come into it a lot lately. All right, I think, is there a motion? Do we have a motion on the bill? Okay, so.
Madam Chair, I have another amendment.
Oh, so sorry. So hard to see the forest through the trees. And do I have to refresh again? I only have one for me.
No, it should be in there.
It's the top one? No, that was already taken.
Okay.
This one? I thought we just did that one. All right, do you want to speak to your amendment?
Yeah, if I can find the...
All right, this amendment, just so we're all on the same page, 10401.2B, correct?
Correct. Is that right, Jesse?
Well, that one is actually incorrect. That it should not be B, but I will fix that.
But it's...
It is that one, yes.
Okay. Do you want me to just explain
Okay,
it?
hold on. We got to make sure everybody's looking at the same thing. So this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 down. Villarreal Amendment 2. And it's basically 2 items. All right, everybody on there? All right, Councilwoman Villarreal, you want to explain this?
Thank you, Madam Chair. These are just small corrections. One is inserting the words for the commercial use for our definition of small commercial events. So the definition will read, small commercial event means a cultural event with a commercial use that is limited to the Plaza Park and does not require street closures for the commercial use. The second change, minor change, is if you go to page 7, and we're talking about how major and small commercial permitted events have to follow the various rules, and one of them in particular, it says the city may require specific booth layouts. What it adds is table, so it will read, the city may require specific booth or table layouts, and that's to cover small commercial event permits, because we're not doing booths, we're doing tables. They have to follow what the plaza artisans have to adhere to.
Okay, are you making a motion?
Move to approve these two proposed amendments.
Or just move your amendment?
Move my amendment.
Second.
Okay, motion and a second, further discussion? All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Do we have other amendments? Are we ready for a motion on the bill? It's the pleasure of the committee.
Move to approve as amended?
We have a motion and a second to approve this bill as amended. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. All right, I believe we are done with what we had pulled from consent. Sorry, so we are moving now to introduction. Well, we don't have any discussion items. Introduction of legislation. So does somebody want to introduce this?
I will introduce this on behalf of my co-counselor. This is a resolution sponsored by Councilor Chavez. It's a resolution adopting the 2024-2028 Senior Infrastructure Capital Improvements Plan, ICIP, for the Division of Senior Services, Community Health and Safety Department.
Okay, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It is being introduced here because there is a time deadline to get this passed. So I think that's all we'll say about it. We're going to move on. No executive session. Matters from staff.
No matters from staff, Madam Chair.
Matters from the committee. All right, matters from the chair. Our next meeting, Tuesday, September 6th. And we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.